So this is a special episode, and I'm going to do something that I don't typically do, and that is to split up this episode into two parts. Anybody who's familiar with the This Is Horror podcast will know that Michael David Wilson is kind of known for doing longer form discussion, and that is absolutely what happened in the case of talking with him about this book. So this is the first of two episodes. The first episode that you're going to hear now is not focused as much on the book that we came here to talk about as is talking about Michael himself. So we talk about early life lessons, we talk about writing, and we talk a little bit about some random stuff like the This Is Horror Awards and stuff. So this is a much more getting to know the author episode, and then we are scheduled to record a second part very soon, and that is going to be very focused on the book. Something else that came up in our original discussion was about a 30-minute kind of off-air, not intended to be part of the podcast discussion, where we got really deep into my almost book review analysis of House of Bad Memories, and then him reacting to some of the points that I made, and then it kind of grew into a discussion that felt very podcast worthy. So right now I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be part of part two, or if we're going to make it a special kind of cutscenes bonus type of thing that we put somewhere, whether it's my YouTube, if it's kind of on the This Is Horror website. Not 100% sure. That's a really interesting conversation, and I want to make sure that we make that content available. Just not 100% sure where it's going to land right now. Then on a future episode, we'll have a more in-depth discussion where we talk about his book, House of Bad Memories, and really dive deeper into that. But for now, please enjoy part one.
House of Bad Memories is for fans of dialogue-heavy fiction that like books that change genre partway through and then again towards the end. If you like Tarantino-style tangents, then this is for you. If you like WTF moments, then this is for you. If you like reading about repressed childhood trauma, and maybe you do, then this is for you. Denny wants to be the world's best dad to his baby daughter, but things get messy when he starts hallucinating his estranged, abusive stepfather, Frank. Then Frank winds up dead, and Denny is held hostage by his junkie half-sister, who demands he uncovers the cause of her father's death. Will Denny defeat his demons or be perpetually tortured for refusing to answer impossible questions? House of Bad Memories is Funny Games meets This Is England with a Rosemary's Baby undertaste. Available from Cemetery Gates Media, Friday 13th of October.
Michael, we have known each other since, I want to say, 2012. And we've been guests on each other's podcasts, and I've listened to, I want to say I've probably listened to every episode of This Is Horror. And so I've noticed some things about your format, and maybe this whole time I've just been waiting to be able to do this to you. So the first question is, can you tell me about some of your early life lessons?
I thought we might be going in that direction when you mentioned the format. You know, early life lessons, are they specific to writing, or is it anything that seems pertinent that may have informed me growing up in those formative years?
I'm going to say anything goes, because outside of talking about books or being an author, there's a lot of wisdom in you. So if there's a specific nugget that you think is something that would be good for listeners, I'd love to go with that.
Yeah. Goodness, I can't believe that I didn't anticipate that you were going to do this. I was so ready for it for episode 500 of This Is Horror podcast, but you've sprung it upon me here. Early life lessons. What an absolute rookie mistake to have not prepared for this potential question. I'll tell you a podcasting and a being interviewed lesson, and that is, if somebody asks you a question and you're not sure exactly how to answer it, then you can stall a little bit for time by repeating some of the key words in the question. You can also say, "Oh, well, that's an excellent question," and quite a few people do that to me. But I mean, when you're talking about early life, the initial thing that I'm thinking about is how I got into horror to begin with. But I'm wondering if we covered that before when we were, talking on booked. But even if we did, is it okay to kind of repeat and to talk about that kind of thing?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this isn't like canon
I
to
don't.
a point where it's like, no,
I don't have.
all ARC Party listeners are expected to have listened to every conversation we've ever had.
Yeah, I don't have that much confidence in listeners to have been such diehards. So, as much as like I'm sure people have heard those. I don't think everybody has.
Mm, well, I'm going
I
to
can throw
tell
you a
you
different
then.
question while you consider it, if you want, unless you're ready.
I mean, to be honest, me answering most questions is a case of I can't wait to find out what I think, and I realize what I think as I'm talking. What I will do is I will answer a slightly different question that you didn't ask me, but since when has that ever stopped me? And I mean, if we talk about early life, I'll tell you about some of my first experiences with story, another popular This Is Horror podcast question. And, that involved hearing ghost stories from my grandmother. Like when I would stay over at her house, she would tell me all of these tales from England, and it's like about like haunted paintings and about this pub that she stayed in. And if you went into the basement at the right time, there were like Roman soldiers that were walking through the basement. But because of the way that the pub had been built, like you'd only see them from the chest up, because back in the day, the, the ground was placed differently. And I think just her telling me all these things, it really ignited an interest in horror and in the disquieting, I suppose. And then that, coupled with my grandfather really encouraging my writing and my stories, probably is what led us, for better or for worse. Other people can be the judge of that. It's what led us to me writing stories like House of Bad Memories. But if I try and think about early life lessons, I mean, as with anyone, that there were good and there were bad things that happened in my childhood, some of which is touched upon, couched in metaphorical terms, sometimes not as couched as you would perhaps think. Um, like House of Bad Memories is probably my most personal book, I would say. Um, it's both my most autobiographical and also like wildly fictitious. It's like I took the thread of different things that happened and then embellished them to kind of the worst conclusion often. Um, but my parents were always very encouraging of education. I think when I was growing up, it was important to get good grades at school, but perhaps they instilled that a little bit too much, because later conversations as an adult, like I'd say to my parents, like I was terrified if I didn't come back with a good grade. Like I felt that I had to. And I think that I don't know if it's a case of them softening their stance and revising their own position, or if there were different factors that made me believe that, if I failed academically, then I became a failure. But there's been different times in my life where I felt that if I so called fail at different things, that I will disappoint, or I will let down, or I will fail my family. Like when it became apparent that my marriage had collapsed and I was going to get divorced, I felt like I'd failed everyone. I Even though I do not cast any judgment on anyone who is divorced, and actually if someone says they're getting divorced, it's like, congratulations, because it doesn't come from like, happy relationships don't result in a divorce. So it's always
Yeah.
actually a good thing. But just because I don't have any stigma towards divorced people, but I felt that people would judge me, or I felt that my family would. And when I went into marriage like that, I took that vow and that promise very seriously, and I just felt that I'd messed up. But then nobody was like, yeah, you done bad there. You gone fucked up. I don't know why they'd be talking in vaguely bad American terms anyway. Seeing as everyone in my family is British, but maybe it was Bob who
It was just
was
Bob, yeah.
casting judgment. Yeah. Um. So yeah, like I guess what I'm as I think about it, like I'm not really answering life lessons, but I guess I'm talking about life misconceptions that then turned out to be entirely false. Um, because yeah, I felt like if you don't academically achieve, then you failed. That is not a lesson. That is not a takeaway, and that is not true. And actually, I think in 2023, like there are so many more routes than academia. Um, I suppose maybe something that in retrospect has been learned is that you should follow your passion. You should do what you're interested in. And I've always been interested in writing and reading and English literature. And every time I deviate from it, I get back on the path eventually. So the big lesson is to just, follow those things that you're passionate about, do the things that light you up. So, I mean, my parents have admitted to this that, growing up, even though I wanted to be a writer, they encouraged me that I should do something that would bring more money in, that would be more financially secure. And, I've had conversations with my mother where she says, particularly seeing what I'm doing at the moment and the way that the trajectory of my life has gone, that she kind of regrets, encouraging that. But actually, like, I don't think she should regret it at all. And I think that it came from a completely good place and good intentions. And I always talk about how intentionality is the most important thing. And actually, if I was encouraging like my daughter and she wanted to be a writer, I think yes, you follow your passion, you write, you do the things that light you up, but you also have to couple that with some realism and some pragmatism. And I see so many people, so many writers, that it's like they're doing the writing, but they also have like another job. And I think that is like a realistic thing to do. So I feel that, the truth is in the middle. So my mother was saying she regretted telling me to find a financially secure job rather than writing. Now she thinks she should have just told me to follow the writing, but actually the truth is follow the writing, but also have a, a stream of income. And then, perhaps in the future, when your writing is bringing in a decent amount of money, you can then transition to doing that full time. That's the advice that I think would be most sensible. But as I said, I always seem to come back to English literature and writing. So even though English had always been my favorite subject, when it came to applying for universities, I thought I would apply to do philosophy.
Hmm.
And I I don't know what reason I have kind of told people for doing this in the past. I don't know what version of truth I have given or lack thereof truth. And sometimes I would talk about wanting a change, but if I'm going to be perfectly honest, the main reason that I applied for philosophy was because it would be easier to get in to Oxford University with philosophy rather than English in terms of looking at statistics. And I like to take, and obviously this is completely flawed because I'm not taking into account that English is my strength and I've never studied philosophy before. That was the flaw. But I got some philosophy books out of the library. I got an introduction to philosophy. I learnt the name Aristotle. I learnt about Seneca, and I did enough that I managed to get an interview at Oxford. Unfortunately, I didn't get a place, but I did get a place at all the other universities. So I think, hadn't studied philosophy before, managed to get the interview. I think that's a reasonable accomplishment. I got quite far when you consider all of the factors. Um, and then, at university, so I'm studying philosophy the first year, but like something is missing, and that is the joy and the excitement of English literature and writing. And then I looked into, like, is it possible to transfer? There was kind of like a major controversy within the creative writing department about that because I managed to convince my philosophy professor and a few members of the creative writing staff to transfer me to the creative writing department for the second year, and I would be starting in the second year. And then the director and I believe the founder of the program found out about this. And Warwick's writing program, Warwick University, is really prestigious. And like at the time, there's only 20 to 25 people who are getting in per year. There's a meticulous interview process, probably more than to do philosophy at the University of Oxford. And yeah, they have to submit writing portfolios as well. It's intense. And so then the founder of this program finds out, like, well, you just let in this goth kid, which I was at the time, who like half-assed in philosophy, jump into the writing program. So then I had a meeting with him, and so at that point, on paper, it was a done deal that I could start the next year at year 2 of English and creative writing. And he was like, you know what, he was pretty frank about it. He said, like, he wasn't that happy with what had been agreed upon, but if I can show my commitment, then they'll accept me. But he wants to take it to the next level. He's like, okay, well, I want you to complete this first year of philosophy doing your absolute best. I want you to get a minimum of a 2-1, which is the second highest grade you could get. And to show your dedication, I don't want you going into year 2. I want you to go into year 1. So that would then make my
Yeah.
university course 1 year longer, which of course is financially um, more expensive. But I made a decision on the spot and I said, yeah, because I wanted to show him, yeah, I am serious about this. And so that was, one of multiple times where I have started straying from my passion and then been brought back
Yeah.
to on track. And yeah, I'm so glad that I did do it as I did it. Ironically, and as people who are This Is Horror podcast listeners probably can tell, I'm way more into philosophy now than I was back in the day. Like, if you listen to the early episodes, well, not even that early, probably the first 5 years, I'm not ending the episodes with quotes from Epictetus and Seneca and Marcus
Right.
Aurelius. But if you've listened to an episode this month, probably half of them, I
Yeah.
had a little bit of philosophical wisdom. So my interest in philosophy came later. We can go into that at some point if you want. We can also save it for another episode, or just save it for not. Really up to you. But the second and the most pivotal moment where I have deviated from writing and then got back into it was actually about a year after graduating from university. And I kind of feel that, like, in my generation, so people graduating kind of early noughties, early to mid noughties, we were, no, yeah, mid to late noughties. I don't know. I can't keep track of time. We were sold this idea that we could be anything we wanted. We could be astronauts. We could be rock stars. Unlimited possibility. Then the recession hit, and we'd like spent all of our youth like accruing these academic achievements that, as I told you, were very important to me growing up. And then it's like, well, there's no money. So rather than,
Yeah.
graduating from Warwick, arguably one of the top 5 universities in the UK, um, some would argue top 20, that's still good. Still good. But I didn't get handed a job. In fact, I just worked a job doing admin in an office, which is obviously fine, do whatever you want. But the point is that this job I could have got without having gone to university. So I spent that year just a little bit troubled and questioning what's happened here, because I've spent this time at university thinking that I'm going to kind of walk away better off, but actually I'm just in a situation that I would have been in if I had never gone to university. Now, this is obviously couching it purely in financial terms. Obviously, there are a lot of benefits of the course, of like all the friends, of the networking, but still, it's quite expensive, really. And 4 years have gone by where I haven't really earned any money. The only
Yeah.
money I'd earned in those 4 years had been to be able to pay the tuition fees. So that's gone. And I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do, particularly because, as we say, I've got it into my head that I should be doing something that is financially secure. And I thought, well, I could do a graduate diploma in law, because lawyers, they're paid a lot of money. So I took out a loan. I applied to do this law course. So doing the law course would then effectively add on to my degree the equivalent of also having done a law degree. So I did that. It was tough, as you would expect. I mean, legal courses aren't known for being like really easy. At the end of it, the only thing I knew was I absolutely didn't want to be a lawyer. but but I thought this is not the path that I want. It was challenging. I suppose it was interesting to a point, but I just knew that I want to get into something to do with my writing. So it was an
Yeah.
expensive lesson, but so yeah, I've couched it in terms that in some ways it's the most expensive lesson of my life because of financially how bloody high that loan was that I had to take out. But in other ways, it's the best moment of my life because after I'd done the law course and realized I didn't want to do that, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not chasing the money. So the only thing left is to chase my passion and to chase what I'm interested in. And that was the writing. So,
Yep.
immediately, like literally the summer after, I started writing for a number of heavy metal magazines and horror magazines. I shortly thereafter started Read Horror, which became This Is Horror. And since that moment, I've been on this journey that I'm on now. I mean, I I got anything that was tangentially related to writing. So some of my first jobs apart from the journalism because the journalism was in a freelance capacity, but I
Hmm.
had things like editorial assistant, but like at a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
Very tenuous, but we actually spoke off air. Like you can manipulate your CV to try and make it
Yeah.
look a little bit better. Then I had stuff like online content writer. I kind of went between editorial and marketing jobs because like marketing as well it is tangentially related. You're having to write something,
Yeah.
so
Definitely.
there's copy involved. And from there I jumped into because I wanted to be in publishing, so I've got this as horror going on at the time, and I'm making more and more contacts within the industry. And I thought, well, I want to be working for a publisher, ideally as an editor. So then I spoke to Jonathan Oliver at Solaris Books and Abaddon Books, also under the umbrella Rebellion Publishing, who also have 2000 AD. I asked, like, were there any jobs at the moment? There weren't any jobs, but okay, is there a possibility for an internship? Oh, I'm not sure about that. What if it's unpaid? Okay, so then, like, I used all of my vacation at a job where I was a digital marketer to do an unpaid, I think it was a 2-week block at Rebellion Publishing. And then off the back of that, I got offered a job as kind of like an online content assistant. I do remember we managed to upgrade the title to Digital Publishing Associate, which that sounds pretty good. How did that come about? Well, my boss pretty much was like, "Well, this is difficult to classify. What title would you like to have for your job?" And I thought Digital Publishing Associate sounds pretty good on the CV, and there we go. I mean, I had to take a massive pay cut to do that because it's like going from a semi senior or at least mid level digital content job to to effectively just being an assistant. But it's like, this is in publishing, this is surrounded by books, this is where I belong. We've already learnt the lesson that we're not
Hmm.
following the money and we're following the dream. So if I reject this opportunity, then I haven't learnt the lesson at all. So then I stayed with Rebellion Publishing for, I think it was about a year and a half. The only reason that I left was because, I suppose, about a year into it, um, I decided that I wanted to explore the world more. I had a friend who'd been teaching in South Korea, and I thought, well, I'd quite like to, to teach in that area of the world. So I was looking at South Korea and Japan. Then I get a job offer in Japan, and I just didn't want to be stuck in the UK and not know of anything different. And so it,
Hmm.
it was kind of like it was still exploring my passion, but a little side mission because it's not related to the writing. But it's like, well, if ever there's a reason to leave a job that you really like, I think going to live in Japan and experience that side of the world is a good reason. And I still had this as horror. I still had like my writing, I guess, like little pockets of freelance editing. I had the podcast. So even though I wouldn't have the full-time job, I mean, I ironically, the best jobs that I've had, I kind of created for myself. And I have had periods where I've been a full-time writer, with I guess the caveat being I am including the editing and the podcasting under kind of one umbrella. But at the moment, I'm teaching and I'm writing and doing all the This Is Horror stuff that I do. And it's still all about follow the passion. It's like, make sure that you're financially secure to a point, but
Yeah.
make sure that you're doing the work that lights you up. And that is an incredibly long answer that has gone off on many different tangents.
No, but it all feeds this kind of the purpose of the life lesson that you were talking about. And one thing that I want to tag on a thought about with the idea of um, the lesson you learned from not doing not doing just the practical thing or following the money, but also like you have to follow your passion. I feel, and maybe this is just from my personal experience in my life, it's, and I'm going to equate this in a weird way, but do you know how if you're dealing with someone who's an addict or something, you can't make them change. They have to kind of get there. Like there's got to be
Right.
something
Yeah.
that happens internally for them in order to want to make the change. I feel like for some people, following the passion is that way too. So I've always been hugely passionate about reading and books. And, there was a chunk of my early 20s where, I thought that my path was going to be writing. Um, but I never really made my living that way. But there was a moment where after starting my first podcast, Booked, after doing it for a little while and seeing all of like the people that I'd met and the connections I'd made and all the positive things that came out of it, suddenly there was a moment of kind of clarity where it's like you're doing something purely for you because this is what makes you happy.
Mm.
And I don't think I started that journey thinking this was going to be the outcome, but I just kind of knew I liked talking about books, and it just happened to grow into really supporting the passion. So I think that for some people, following the passion, sometimes you need to really figure out what that means too. Like, what is the passion? You might have to try stuff out. Like, I really thought I was going to be a writer, and eventually it kind of occurred to me that I'm much better at talking about people's stories than writing my own, and I'm actually much more satisfied with that too. So um, for me, it was a bit of a journey of just realizing what the passion was. But once I locked onto it, yeah, that became very, very important to me.
Yeah, and people who have listened to me be so-called interviewed on other podcasts know that I have this tendency to start interviewing the host sometimes because I'm a genuinely curious person. But I mean, in terms of, your own writing, you put out a short story in the book anthology, an incredible anthology. If people can still track it down, then they absolutely should. Amazing stories from people like Fred Venturini, Bob Pastorella, the co-host of This Is Horror, and Paul Tremblay, to name but
Yeah.
three. But you had your story in that. You said that there was a point where you thought writing was going to be the path that you took. You're saying now it's more like the reading, it's the curating, the interviews with the podcast. Is there any part of you that still wants to write? Do you still write a little bit? I mean, yeah, you're saying that path isn't for you, but there's so many writers who they literally start in like their 60s or sometimes
Yeah.
70s. So is this an itch that you'd still like to scratch? Is this a path that you could see yourself going down?
Not currently. I think that what I don't get a lot of, and I'm going to refer to one of your recent conversation with Josh Malerman, where you guys did a lot of talking about his unpublished books and stuff, and the idea that his unpublished books were like the best formed ideas for what could be a published book. I don't
Right.
have a lot of ideas that I want to explore. I think is where I'm at right now. Um, and I think that's one of the reasons that I mean, I have thoughts from time to time where I'm like, oh, what if XYZ? And I just don't have enough energy to explore them. So I don't know. I like the idea of writing. I have notebooks in this room of stories and story ideas and stuff that I wrote down 15 years ago that are just sitting there. It's not the thing for me right now. But I've also kind of evolved this idea that for me, the idea of talking about storytelling and analyzing it and explaining it and exploring it is that's really what I think the passion is like maybe not telling stories as much as it is like exploring and celebrating and understanding stories.
Mm,
So I guess that's kind of what really charges me now. Like if I could um so I'll give a very specific example. I did a couple of quotes on Twitter the other day, and I think it's a really good kind of exploration of why things can be taken out of context. So give me a second while I pull this up. We're not taken out of context, but not fully. You can explore a part of a thing and not understand like the bigger idea.
right. So for the audio listeners who can't see,
Yeah.
we've got Rob Olsen. He's wearing a blue t-shirt, a black hat. He's typing into a smartphone at the moment, just
Yeah.
providing a commentary as to, like you see for the visually impaired. So I'm
Right.
giving
Right.
them that in the background. I set you the scene. He's in like a relatively small office, but big enough to get the job done. There is a bookcase in the background. It's got a lot of good books on, particularly some books by me, including the girl in the video. And they're watching. And goodness, there's the Elvis room, number one of however many we printed, probably
100.
125 and what of 100, in fact. So maybe I kept those 25 to invalidate the value of yours. I don't know. But got water for drowning too, anyway. Taking a sip of beer.
All
You
right.
hear that audio, people? That was the strong sound of beer hitting the table. We're back. Here we go.
All right. I'm just gonna. I'm not editing any of that out now. But I did on
Okay.
Twitter, on my Arc Party Twitter account. I quoted Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it's a quote that says, "I think the chances of finding out what's actually going on are so absurdly remote that the only thing to do is say, hang the sense of it and keep yourself busy. I'd much rather be happy than right any day." And that's the character Slartibartfast talking to Arthur Dent. If you take that quote by
Mm.
itself, it's pretty inspirational. And so, like, you can just take that and be like, "Oh, I'm going to model some way I act off of that." But if you look at the next two lines, or at least the way the interaction goes in the film, which I watched recently, Arthur says, "Are you happy?" And Slartibartfast says, "Well, no, that's where it all falls down." So, like, those are the kinds of thoughts I have now where, like, that's excellent storytelling, because I could have just quoted the first part and it would have been
Yeah.
this real statement about a thing. But excluding those next two lines says almost as much as including them. It's like I'm choosing
Mm.
to take from this what I want instead of really taking what the author meant, which was like, you can have these high aspirations and philosophies and stuff, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't fucking matter. So I think those are the things that I like to dig into and analyze as far as storytelling goes, because that's very effective. He builds you up with that first line, and then he just tears it all apart, but it makes you think about, why was that so effective? So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think in a way, like analyzing and dissecting stories is a form of storytelling, or at least it very much complements and
Yeah.
enhances the story. So you're continuing to tell the story in a sense, just as you didn't start writing it, you're adding your interpretation. And so I think it is an art form too. It is you we spoke to a number of authors before, and Kathy Koji being one that springs to mind, where we've said that the story being told doesn't finish with the writer finishing, it continues, it
Yeah.
evolves. So, as I say, in a sense, you are storytelling, it's just not in the conventional way.
Yeah. Yeah. And doing the podcast when we did reviews was definitely that, because um, it was a conversation where we kind of learned more about the book by talking about it, and we kind of crystallized maybe a thought about what it could mean. Um, so yeah, it's kind of the natural next step that you would hope. But again, like, there was that moment of clarity for me where, until I started talking about books, I didn't realize how important it was to talk about books. But once I did, I was like, this is what I must do this. If I read a book, I have to talk to somebody about it so that we can dig into what is significant about it. So yeah, I had that kind of like moment of change where it became apparent how important the thing I was doing was, I guess. But this is about you. We're talking about you, God damn it. Uh, so, um, my next kind of gotcha question, because that was very serious, and I didn't know if I was going to do the joking question first or the serious question first, and I hit you with the serious question first. So now I'm going to
Okay.
give you the joking one, and I don't anticipate you having a good answer for this. But
Is that based on previous interviews and my answers that you've
no, I
you've
just don't
heard
think you
my
think about
track
these things.
record?
I've got props. So the next question is, how many people in the years that you've done the This Is Horror Awards do you believe have won 3 This Is Horror Awards? Do you think that
Okay,
it's a good number of people?
I thought we were going to go somewhere dark for a second, or like controversial. I thought you were going to ask me how many people who had won awards. I personally thought, who would I have voted for? Who was my pick? Well,
Oh,
I'm
no,
glad we
no.
didn't go.
Yeah, no, this is a
I
whole
did
different
get a
gotcha
little
where
bit
I'm kind of patting myself on the back.
in terms of like who do I think? How many people do I think have won 3 This Is Horror Awards.
3 or more, I guess.
Yeah, well, of course, there is a former podcast called Booked Podcast. That is your own podcast. And definitely Stephen Graham Jones has as
Yeah.
well. Stephen Graham Jones has. Now, have there been any
I would
more?
imagine maybe Ellen
I
Datlow.
Hang on. Do you not? I thought you had the answer for this because you said it's a got you. So I thought you were going to tell me. No, you
No,
don't have
no,
the
that would be way
bloody
too
answer.
much work.
Well, it's not much of a got you then, is it? I think the answer is Booked and Stephen Graham Jones. Ellen Datlow has only won one This Is Horror Award. It was the
Oh my
latest one,
God.
but she has been the runner-up nearly every time apart from the latest one that she won. So,
Oh wow.
like, I get it. You would think that she had won multiple. She deserves to win multiple awards of pretty much anything. She's an amazing editor, but actually, only the one time. So it's you and it's Stephen Graham Jones. There have been a few that have won a couple of times. John Langan has won twice. Nightmare Magazine have won twice. Ladies of the Fright have won twice. Pseudopod, I think they've won twice. If they've won 3 times, they'll be like, what the hell are you talking about? Why did you not include us? And I believe that John Padgett has won twice too, for Vesterian and for Grim Scribe. So there's your answer. You haven't
Nice.
prepared. You haven't prepared an actual answer for us to fact check. So it's like most things on the internet, no fact check is required.
Well, if I knew, I think it would take a little of the wind out of the sails of asking the question, you know. I just came in with a bunch of bravado because I didn't know if it was a good answer or not. If I knew the answer, I think I might have asked the question differently. So for journalistic integrity, I couldn't know.
Right.
But here's what I will say. I know I was a runner-up one year as well for Podcast of the Year. So 3 wins
There
and
you
a
go.
second
That
place.
low, if you're counting runners up, then yeah.
But Ellen she's stacking up those Stokers, I think. So I think she's I think she'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, what are you gonna say disparaging about the This Is Horror Awards? It's like
I would
she's
never.
got a Stoker, she doesn't need you fucking piece of paper with the This Is Horror Award.
No, I wasn't going to say that. No. So that was really because here's the way that question got built into this episode. I was moving things around in my office and I happened to see those and I was like, oh, I'm talking to Michael today. I might as well brag about how many awards I've won. So that's how that went. You just saw the thumbs up, didn't you?
Nice thumbs up that you just threw onto the screen. That was unexpected, and this is not great content for audio listeners. So, I mean, it's as I said, there was a thumbs up icon that coincided with Robb's answer. I believe he did it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a spectral one. It wasn't a glitch.
That's in the upcoming release of the new Mac OS. That's a feature that's built in. It interprets hand gestures and puts them on the screen.
This is a joke, right?
No, like watch. Totally true.
It isn't a joke. I can verify. He put his thumb down, singular, and then about 4 seconds later. So there is a bit of a lag with the new iOS, but it is beta at the moment.
It's beta software, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about House of Bad Memories. Um,
Okay.
Before we get to the 1 hour mark. um, so, House of Bad Memories is, um, first of all, I want to say it's releasing October 13th, Friday, October 13th, through Cemetery Gates. And this episode will be available before it's out. So, you can pre order directly through them. I know that there's a modified rate right now, but I don't know how long that goes for.
Yeah.
But
So
if hope
pre-order to get a special pre-order price, and I mean it. I think it's officially running for about another week or so, but I will make sure that Arc Party listeners and like Joe at Cemetery Gates, if he's listening, is like, hang on, what? Don't worry, Joe. I'll make sure that Arc Party listeners can also get that at a reduced rate right up until pre-order. So, I'll
awesome.
see. Do we need another link for that? Do we need a code? It's in hand. Don't you worry, Arc Party listeners. If you have a problem getting it, then contact me on Twitter, also known as X, at This Is Horror.
X. I don't even want to talk about how fucking dumb that is. Um, oh, all right. That Walter Isaacson wrote a book about Elon Musk, and that just came out, and I didn't even want to think about it. But anyway,
Okay, well,
House of Bad,
let's think about a different book then. House of Bad
yeah,
Memories.
House of Bad Memories. Um, so there's several ways I want to go with this. But first of all, as far as novels that you've written,
Mm-hmm.
where does this sit? Like, you've published The Girl in the Video, you published They're Watching, co-written with Bob
Mm-hmm.
Pastorella.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is this so? Do you basically write and publish, or is there just a pile of them sitting out there that you haven't published yet? Like, where are you? Where does this sit in like the the collection of stuff that you've written?
I mean, there's a lot of novels in progress and at various stages, and there's a lot of short stories that I've written and mostly published as well. So, I mean, there's various ways to go about answering that, but in terms of my published or hopefully quite soon published works, I kind of see the girl in the video on there watching as being two books that you could put together, both in terms of thematic concerns and also where I am in my life and also writing style. House of Bad Memories, I think, deviates a little bit from that. I mean, I think people would have seen elements of like fiction or thriller with the other two books, but I think I kind of have taken that further with House of Bad Memories. And so, whilst you could maybe argue the girl in the video and they're watching a horror with elements of thriller and elements of crime, you could almost flip it with House of Bad Memories and you could say this is like a thriller with elements of horror. And similarly, a book that I recently finished and is with some beta readers called Daddy's Boy, which I've pitched as the Greasy Strangler meets a Joe R. Lansdale heist novel. I feel that kind of goes next to House of Bad Memories. So the girl in the video and they're watching, you could compile them together as a little bundle, and then you could put House of Bad Memories and Daddy's Boy as a bundle too. I think if people, and this is ludicrous to be almost pitching Daddy's Boy before House of Bad Memories has come out, but we're going to go there anyway. But I think if people enjoyed House of Bad Memories, and particularly like if they like the comedic element of things, and some of the dialogue that people have started comparing to the likes of Tarantino and Guy Ritchie, then I think there's gonna be something in Daddy's Boy for them. If they didn't, then they're probably not. So if you preferred House of Bad Memories, which you haven't read yet because it hasn't come out yet, then you'll like Daddy's Boy, which also isn't out yet, but give it a year. But if you prefer the girl in the video, it might not be for you. So those are 4 books. Then at the moment, there was a short story that I think is one of the best short stories I've written called What Would Wesley Do? It's only available on the No Sleep podcast behind a paywall. So you have to subscribe to that specific episode. But that short story has come so close to being published in some really respected anthologies. It's got shortlisted so many times. And I think it's personally the best short story that I've written. And I've had like about 20 or so short stories published. So it is a little bit frustrating that the one that I think is my best hasn't been published in print. But I think now that it might be because there are better things planned for it. So last year, I started getting into screenwriting to see is that something that, I'm apt to do. The jury is still out on that one. But me and Bob, we co-wrote an adaptation of Their Watching. And then literally again, days ago, I finished a script for a full-length version, much expanded, obviously, of the short story What Would Wesley Do? And my my plan at the moment, and we'll see what my film agent thinks. Even if he doesn't like it, I think I'm gonna do it anyway. So sorry, Ryan, but I do appreciate your input. But I really want to do this. I want to then expand or almost what I'm going to do is so we've had the short story and then that has informed the screenplay, but then I want to take the skeleton of the screenplay to inform a novella or novel. And I think that when that book is available, that will then actually be more in the girl in the video and the They're Watching camp of things. It's probably going to be a bit of a hybrid between the two modes because I mean, I obviously wrote it much nearer to the girl in the video. I mean, I say obviously, I don't know if I've said at any point when I wrote it, so maybe it wasn't obvious at all. But now I'm going back to write it when I'm more in the House of Bad Memories and Daddy's Boy mindset. So we've got that. Also, I'm 60,000 words into a kind of psychosexual thriller called Together Forever. The original idea was to write something that was kind of commercial that I might be able to pitch to a literary agent. But then the flaw of that was, yeah, but I'm still writing as me. So I'm going to go on weird tangents. At the point where the calisthenics sex cult turned up, I knew that this was not the commercial novel that I'd intended it to be. But we got that one. I'm also co-writing a book called Inamuri, again about 60,000 words deep. I'm co-writing that with John Crinan. It is kind of hard-boiled Japan set in a sleep cafe, like if Haruki Murakami, Ryo Murakami joined forces to write the screenplay for John Wick, and then it was directed by Quentin Tarantino. So that's a bit of a mad one. and and so that those are the main projects that I'm working on at the moment. And there are a number of kind of first draft novels in various forms. So yeah, there's a lot of works in progress and first drafts, and I guess then it falls more into that Josh Malaman camp of it's like, well, here's Bird
Yeah.
Box. By the way, there's another 20. I mean, there's not 20, but there's probably a good 10, possibly a good
Yeah.
10 and another bad 10. There could be 20, but 10 of them ain't going anywhere.
Right on. So I like that kind of delineation that you made about the girl in the video and they're watching being kind of like one kind of grouping, and then this moving on to a different grouping. But one thing that I definitely got when I was reading this book was similarities to in there watching some of the more kind of detective like figuring things out, like the mystery slash not
Okay,
mystery
yeah.
but like
Yeah.
investigative kind of like elements of that book. I was like, okay, um I'm feeling that style again. And then I had a thought that was like, this is definitely like the Wilson kind of voice. And then I was like, oh, that's nice. I've since I've read enough that I can recognize a Wilson voice. So that was a nice little moment for me, being like, oh yeah, like it's nice when you've read enough of someone where you can start feeling comfortable with knowing how they write. Um, but there's no question there. Where I want to
Well,
start. Oh, go
mm,
on.
I was thinking a little bit about that kind of thing the other day. And I mean, a few years ago, Max Booth had said to me that, like, I might want to consider writing things in a kind of different style or a different genre, because there was the potential that I was almost, I don't exactly know what the term is here, because it's not exactly writing the same book again and again, but there's the potential to just keep going back to themes or writing similar characters. I suppose the kind of writer equivalent to being typecast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I thought about that, but actually, recently, and maybe because of all the stuff that's been going on in my life, it's like I just want whatever I write to be authentically me, and to be interesting to me, and to be fun to me. And I do think we are, say we, there's only one of me. I am getting to a point where you could almost parody a Michael David Wilson story. It's like there's going to be heavy metal references. There's going to be, particularly recently, some almost Tarantino-esque tangents and side notes. It's going to be quite dialogue heavy. It's not a guarantee, but there may be some voyeurism. There may be someone dancing. I've had some reviewers say that that's problematic. That's fine. There'll probably be a ref. Well, it's not fine to be problematic. I just mean I don't agree with. I don't agree with that. They're entitled to their opinion. I have a different opinion on that matter. There's probably going to be references to Japan, and there's probably going to be, on some level, some not ideal relationships, let's say, and there's a good chance that the protagonist is going to be a socially awkward person, borderline fucking idiot at times. That's
Yeah.
okay. That, like, I'm writing things for, a certain audience, and rather than trying to be like, oh, I don't want to fall into this box. I mean, it's not a box that a lot of other authors are doing, so it's not all that timeless genre of dick jokes and voyeurism and what the fuck moments. But rather than like straying away from it, I'm just embracing it, and it's like whatever story comes up is the story that I'm going to write. And there is a little parallel actually to the lesson that I was talking about before, where I always kept coming back to English literature and writing, even when I was taken away from it. And so, I mean, one of the reasons that I started planning Together Forever was I was looking at getting a literary agent, but I knew that Daddy's Boy was not the novel to get an agent with. So then I started planning this more commercial thing, but it just wasn't fun to be by the numbers commercial. So I had to add my twist to it. And, I'm probably never going to write something that you think, oh, that's an easy sell to an agent. But hopefully, if I do things with enough competence, there'll be something unique enough where somebody will then decide to represent me. And if they don't, that's also fine, because there are other avenues, like the having a literary agent can be useful, but it's not to be put on a pedestal, and it's not the only viable route to a writing career.
Yeah, that's true. Going back to something that you said about there's always going to be references to this and this and this, I immediately thought of Stephen Graham Jones, because we just talked on the podcast recently about Demon Theory, which he wrote in 1999. And some of the stuff he
Mm,
said he was making references to, and people have been like, why are these characters talking about, you know, music that's from the late 80s and whatever. And I was
mm,
thinking to myself, that's like in every book you write.
yeah.
Um, but imagine if someone discouraged him from doing that, it wouldn't be a Stephen Graham Jones story. So that was the
Yeah.
first thing that I thought of, was like, even though some people might do things a certain way, that doesn't necessarily mean it's detracting from the story. So,
No, no. And also, I mean, there's another kind of flaw that you're assuming that everyone who discovers one of your books has read all of them.
right.
That is a
Yep.
majorly false assumption.
Yeah. Seriously, for the majority of people, for
um,
sure. Yeah.
and I think there's many, possibly even the majority of writers, where you probably could parody. I mean, if you look at Haruki Murakami, let's throw a cat in, let's throw some jazz music references, let's have some Italian cooking that's probably pasta. He's got
Hmm.
all of these like bizarre elements. Let's have a weird sheep man or something like that. It's classic classic Murakami, but it seems to have worked out okay for him. You look at music, and Motorhead and Slayer, you could say, arguably made a career out of writing not the same song, some would say that, but very similar songs again and again. And I think if people enjoy what you're doing. I mean, I think a lot of people actually like that comfort and
Hmm.
familiarity. So there are some people who they want something completely different from every single story, but there are others who they do want that comfort. So I mean, if I think of Josh Malerman, his range is so diverse, but it's almost like there are different types of Josh Malerman stories that you're going to get, and you don't know which one it is until you jump into it. Now, as is probably obvious from my writing, I'm a big fan of those dialogue heavy books. So I love stuff like A House at the Bottom of a Lake, which I guess I would because I put that one out. But, things like Doug and Judy by the House Washer in the latest one, and also the opening story. I mean, Half the House is Haunted. I was blanking on the
Yeah.
name of it there. That's my favorite Josh Malerman mode. But yeah, he kind of fits. He'll give you everything because he's got that mode, which is comfort food for me. But then he'll fucking throw Igorov in, which is like a mad. Is it a pastiche? What even is it to Russian novel writing? It's like a tribute. It's a pastiche. It's a cover.
Yeah.
And it's so meticulously well done. I mean, he the bits that the editor initially thought, is that writing a bit off? It's like he's parodying some of the flaws of Russian novel writing from a period. This guy is annoyingly intelligent at times,
Right.
but
Yeah, and especially like
Yeah.
factoring in translation and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's like, no, no, I'm parodying if it was translated. Josh, just stop
Just
being
calm
so
down,
good.
man. Yeah, I
Leave
totally.
some talent for the rest of us. What are you playing at?
Um, yeah. So I'm going to jump into some themes of the book, and um, and I'm going to tie it into the fact that you said that this was probably one of the more personal stories that you've written. Understanding that, like in the past, there's been stories that take place in situations similar to yours, like someone who's living in Japan, who's from the UK, who like that kind of stuff has happened before. And you said this was very personal. Themes that I pulled out of this that were important in the story to me, obviously, are parenthood,
Mm,
family, and then obviously like abuse and trauma and survival, kind of as a cluster. Um, and I have another one written down that I'll talk about separately. But of those things, like,
okay.
so where does the personalness come from? Of those themes or outside of those themes, like from yeah, where does that part come from?
Yeah. I mean,
Any of those themes or
this is,
something entirely different?
yeah, everything you've mentioned. And yeah, this is the first interview that I'm doing about House of Bad Memories. And like, I'm not sure, and I won't be sure until I give you this answer. Like, how deep am I going to go on these things? But I I wrote I wrote House of Bad Memories in two very separate times. So originally it was conceived as a novella. Not only was it conceived as a novella, it had a publishing deal, and I pulled out of that for various reasons. But there is literally a point where it yeah, it ended. That was complete. That was how it was going to be published. And then when I got the rights back to it, I was just thinking about like what do I want to do with this? And I think to people who have read it, it will probably be, now that I've said that, quite obvious as to where the original novella ends, and then the new content that expands it into a novel begins. But my film agent, who I mentioned before, Ryan Lewis, he had he had read the initial novella, and so the way that things work with him is that I'll typically send him everything I've written, and I'll ask him, do you think this is something where you could shop the film rights for it? And with some stories he'll say, yeah, absolutely, and with others it's like, this is going to be a harder sell. With House of Bad Memories, he was like that. You know, it was going to be a harder sell. It is very British and specific to living not only in the UK but almost a certain part of the UK. Very dialogue heavy, and he's just like that. He wasn't quite seeing what's the hook here. What is the thing that is going to get the studios to be like, yes, I absolutely have to make this. Because also we're in an age where it's like, if you're selling the film rights, it's not enough for it to be like, this is a good story. It needs to be great. It needs to have a hook. It needs to have, like, this is the reason we want to give you money. um and so, because as a novella, he wasn't sure, how could he sell that. I know I'm gonna have an attempt at expanding this. I'm gonna see, is there something else. And the idea I came up with is, the book that you have read. And I knew that in expanding it, I thought, okay, I have either made it more commercial, or I have made it even harder to sell. And it's probably the latter category. But at that point I decided, no, I'm committed to this now. This is the direction that I want to go in. I certainly know that in the second half there are some scenes or a very specific scene that I do not think will be filmed, although if it is, holy hell.
All right, thanks for listening to part 1 of my discussion with Michael David Wilson about himself and his book House of Bad Memories. I want to do a reminder, House of Bad Memories is out October 13th, which is a Friday the 13th. It's available for pre-order now through Cemetery Gates Media, so make sure you jump on that and get that pre-order done. It is available in paperback and ebook, and if there ends up being some special code through Michael, I'll make sure that it's part of this post. Come back soon for many, many new episodes, including a conversation with Nat Cassidy, conversation with Richard Chismar, and also I have Cassandra Kaw and Richard Kadri joining me together to talk about their book, The Dead Take the A Train. So there's a lot of good stuff coming up, including part 2 with Michael David Wilson.